Occurs to me that I have never actually explained or done any real deep dive onto what that RAD, rapid application development, actually is and what that model looks like. So I'm going to take a look at an interesting article that I caught my eye today around RAD as a model in the same way that you would think about like Swift or Agile or Waterfall, these development kind of models. Uh, Rapid app development is actually a development model. So let's take a look. Let's see what KissFlow has to say about this. KissFlow, which I think is a platform in itself, ultimate guide for application developers in 2022. So what is rapid application development? Right, the model that this stream is named after. Rapid application development, or RAD, means an adaptive software development model based on prototyping and quick feedback with a less emphasis on specific planning. That is, I think, where a lot of the agencies and freelancers have a hard time. I did myself. When you're trying to overplan how this project is going to go and trying to come up with like a timeline and cost of that. So this model is very attractive to the to me, like to the agency side, because you can start, the billing and estimates are a lot easier this way because you're planning in these very like micro steps. Whereas the traditional model is to like plan the entire project out from the beginning and try to come up with a timeline and a cost on that, which is very difficult, very time consuming. And at that point, you don't even know if the client is really going to go with you, right? So you're putting all of this front loading all of this effort and work without the guarantee that you're even going to get the job. So estimates are a tricky thing. With this approach, it's a little bit different, right? It doesn't prioritize all of that steep planning. In general, back to the article, in general, the RAD approach prioritizes development and building a prototype rather than planning. With rapid application development, developers can quickly make multiple iterations and updates to the software without starting from scratch. This helps ensure that the final outcome is more quality focused and aligns with the end user's requirements. I think that's the key thing here, right? A major challenge with the waterfall model is that once the product moves into the testing phase, the tester cannot go back to reiterate and make changes to the core functions of their features. This essentially leaves them with a software that may or may not fit the end user's evolving requirements, right? So that's kind of, I guess the waterfall model is kind of like the old way of doing things, where you're just like building in the silo, you build everything perfectly, and then, find out that there really is not a market for what you're building. So the waterfall model development was established many decades ago as a definitive way to approaching engineering projects. Its name comes from the fact that the progress flows down in sequential steps. The engineering team will first meet the client to discuss all the requirements. The engineers design a solution to meet the requirements. Next, they build the solution. Once it's ready, they take the solution to the client for testing, and after that, fixing all the bugs, they deploy it and carry out scheduled maintenance. That is the old way of doing things, right? Like that is, and when I say old, I don't mean that it's not prevalent, because I think a lot of us are still doing it this way, but it is the non-client input or user input way of building something. Very anti lean startup, if you will. And that's why I call it the old way, because it's kind of the antiquated way, the kind of accepted way to build software, but it doesn't really fit the rapid pace of user needs today, which I think is why rapid app development, or a more flexible approach to developing, is a better option. RAD was conceived in the 1980s, so it is definitely not something new, but unlike the waterfall model, it is not singular. It's a continuous evolution of development philosophies according to the requirement at that particular time. Initially, Barry Boehm, James Martin, and a number of others saw that software was not limited to the traditional methods of engineering. It wasn't a singular resource that requires a fixed structure. It was malleable to suit the needs of the user. Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, it wasn't singular to a fixed structure or a fixed timeline. and it's not an event. I think that's the big thing that I find myself coming back to also. It's like it's not an event. There isn't this big launch. It's kind of like you're iteratively launching all the time, launching feature changes and just like shipping the. I hear that so much, like shipping the product, but it's like you should almost always be shipping, I think is the idea here in under this model, versus like the build up to this big launch. Why do you use rapid app development? RAD is the best approach to develop prototypes swiftly for testing software functionalities without worrying about the effects of on the end product. Businesses opt RAD approach as it requires little focus on the planning phase while enabling the team to design, review, and iterate features and functionalities quickly. Initially, RAD took the shape of the spiral model, where one or more development models were used to work on a particular project. Over time, RAD phases have changed. It's molded itself to fit the requirements of the time while retaining some of the core development guidelines. All right, so let's see what these steps are. And then I'm really interested in the comparisons and the advantages and disadvantages of the different models, which we'll take a look at. At the very beginning, rapid application development sets itself apart from traditional software development models. It doesn't require that you sit with end users to get a detailed list of specifications. Instead, it acts for a broad requirement. The broad nature of the requirement helps you take the time to segment specific requirements at different points of the development cycle. See, that's super interesting, right? Because I feel like that's the way that I prefer to work with clients. It's like, all right, we'll take your big picture into consideration, and then let's isolate the top priorities, right? The first like 3 things that really demonstrate the problem that you're solving, as opposed to trying to build every single thing from the beginning. Right? Pinpointing those core features definitely requires a conversation and a back and forth, but we're not like technically planning out all of the specs for what everything that we're discussing, all encompassing. It's really just like, all right, these are the 1, 2, maybe 3 key features that we're going to build first, and then once we get a reaction to that, we'll move on to these other things and see how important they really are. The broad nature of requirements helps you take the time to segment. I read that already. Prototype. This is where the actual development takes place. Instead of following a rigid set of requirements, developers create prototypes with different features and functions as fast as they can. These prototypes are then shown to the clients, and by clients, I think they mean users, who decide what they like and what they don't. More often than not, these prototypes are quickly made to work to showcase just the key features. This is normal, and the final product is only created during the finalization stage, where the client and developer are in alignment on the final product. So that's actually pretty interesting. That's something that I hadn't really considered before, is that you can build like micro versions of the broader software at simultaneously, like at the same time, and then kind of put it together at the end once you actually know what you're building, based on the feedback that you have gotten from the users. I've never done it that way, but it's pretty interesting to see them call this out here. Construction. The construction stage is a crucial stage of development. Engineers and developers work tirelessly to flesh out a working system from a working model. Feedback and reviews are crucial during this stage. Most bugs, issues, and alterations are addressed during the stage. This stage can be particularly long, especially in cases where clients change directions or feedback is intensive. So I feel like there's a lot of overlap between the prototype and construction phase here. Maybe the construction is kind of like a polish up or polishing of the prototype phase. I'm not sure if they're thinking about these things like separately. Are these really separate? Do they overlap? It's probably not a very 100% clear line between the prototyping phase and the construction phase, because you're kind of building as you're prototyping, right? Like prototype is essentially a small version of the build. So I feel like those will overlap quite a bit. And then finally, your deployment. The final stage of RAD involves deploying the built system into a live production environment. The deployment phase involves intensive scale testing, technical documentation, issue tracking, final customizations, and system simulations. So it almost seems like the real or the polished dev work is backloaded, right? You're kind of experimenting first, and then once you know exactly what you're building, and you already have users, then you go into the point where you're thinking about scaling and customizations and technical documentation, which I imagine gets pretty is pretty hard to do after the fact. It's like that's stuff that you probably could get done a little bit easier if you were doing it while you were prototyping and building. Saving that to the end seems to me like it's just going to be a mess to try and go back and figure everything out. Teams also spend time debugging the app and running final updates and maintenance before the task goes live. Okay, fine. All right, so some of the advantages and disadvantages. This is probably the part that I'm most interested in learning more about. With these steps, it can seem like application development's a great idea for all projects. I think they forgot the R here, the RAD. But that's a stretch. RAD is great for small teams and quick projects, but not as a solution for everything. Here are a few advantages and disadvantages to using application development. Advantages of the RAD model. Requirements can be changed at any time. Let's do the advantages first. Encourages and prioritizes customer feedback. Reviews are quick. Development time is drastically reduced. More productivity with fewer people. The time between prototypes and iterations are short. Integration isn't a problem since it integrates from project inceptions. Okay, I agree with all of those. All right, now some of the disadvantages. Need strong team collaboration. Yeah, that is definitely true. It's really difficult, and I don't know whether this is a bubble thing or just the nature of the way that we work, but it's really difficult to work with 2 or 3 developers at the same time in Bubble when you're all working on the same project. Even if you have different versions, you could argue that that's because the versioning isn't that strong in Bubble yet, and it's hard to see who makes what changes, who's making which changes. But I still think that you really have to be over communicating with your team members if you're going to be working in a Bubble app at the same time. You really have to know all right, what are you working on? When is the point where we're supposed to be merging these changes together and then branching off again in a different version? There's just so much I feel like that can go wrong when you have multiple developers working in the same application at the same time. So yeah, definitely that's something that makes me nervous. Cannot work in large teams. I think the ideal team for this type of work would be 3 people maybe, or and probably with differing skill sets too, right? If you have a designer, the designer may do their thing and then go off and design another page. There could be a back end or integrations person, and what other third person is there? I don't know, but I definitely think that the team could be small and they should not have they shouldn't be working on the same exact thing at the same time. They should be they should be complementary skill sets. Needs highly skilled developers. I don't know about that. I don't really know what that means. I mean, shouldn't they be skilled in whatever area they're working on? It's kind of vague. I don't know if I agree with that one. Needs user requirements throughout the life cycle of I guess my objection to this would be well, in what situation would you not need somebody that's skilled in what they're doing? Why is that specific to this model? Why is that important in this model? I guess that would be my question there. Needs user requirements throughout the life cycle of the product. Needs user requirements throughout the life cycle of the product. I guess I feel like that's an advantage though, because again, it keeps you on track to be building the right things. I suppose that could be overwhelming if there's too much feedback, and you just don't know which development direction to go in. But yeah, it's more like the user requirements are driving the development priorities, and I feel like that is a positive thing. I don't know if I'd list that as a disadvantage. Only suitable for projects which have small development which have a small development time. I'm not sure how to interpret that. More complex to manage when compared with other models. I think that's probably true because of the flexible and dynamic nature of the model. The Don sounds ideal for the non-tech no-code builder where they don't need to learn about things like Scrum and Agile. Well, there's an interesting comparison to Agile. I want to take a look at that. Don, are you more familiar with like Agile and Scrums? Because that is something that uh, I'm not too familiar with. I'm not familiar with at all, actually. So learn the tool, build stuff, bin the bits that are useless, and develop the good bits. Win-win for everyone. Yeah, agreed. I think that's the focus of this model, right? You're not wasting time on features that nobody is interested in. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, same here. I didn't learn a traditional way of building of coding or agile. I don't have a particular framework. I mean, I kind of like fell into the rapid app development model before I even really knew it was a thing. I just felt like it was the best approach to testing new ideas. But I didn't know that, like I didn't know there was a name for it even. It's just when I started describing it and like typing it into Google search, RAD kept coming back, rapid app development. And it's funny because I don't even see too many people in the no code space like using this terminology. They just call it like no code development, I guess, or just development. But no one seems to be calling out like rapid application development as a model for building software or working with clients or anything like that. So I'm not sure like where this term, it kind of says where it came from. It started in the 80s, but it doesn't seem like this term is really caught on. But I prefer this over just the term no code in general because like I feel like there's so many problems with the term no code. Someone smarter than me said that you shouldn't define something by what it isn't because that leaves a lot up in the air. And it also like positions no coders against coders unnecessarily, in my opinion, where there's so much overlap in what we do and how we can help each other. All right, so let's see. Let's go down to the comparisons with waterfall and agile because agile I almost feel like is a halfway point between rad and waterfall. Let's see what they say here. When compared to other software development models, the RAD framework varies by a considerable amount. Obviously, the major difference is how rapid application development focuses on speed when compared to the other models, which usually focus on bringing a working product to the customer. Working product. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so RAD builds a functional working model of the application in the fastest way possible. Waterflow emphasizes intensive planning and follows through on that set of objectives. See, I feel like it's just different. Oh, I'm not sharing. I feel like this is just different use case or different like situations where you are building software. The waterfall method might be the best option if you know exactly what you're building, right? Like maybe in a larger like corporate environment, maybe the waterfall model is required because you're not testing a new feature or testing a new idea completely. You're making small modifications to an already functional product. So in that case, I think the intensive planning that goes along with the waterfall model is probably the better option because you're going to have less bugs this way. Rad, you got a ton of bugs, right? You're basically like putting a buggy product out in front of your users and then kind of almost using your users as your QA testing because they will find it. They will find bugs. And it's just inevitable. I think if you're putting something out there this fast, you're gonna have bugs. Agile builds the app by breaking down large objectives into smaller sprints, right? So yeah, that kind of feels like the halfway point between these two. All right. Rad is perfect for projects that require the shortest time to complete. Waterfall's projects are thoroughly planned and execution is typically time consuming. This is the longer methodology. Agile helps develop projects in periodical milestones or sprints. So I guess my question with Agile, for a question for people who use the Agile method is like, how do you define a sprint? Like, what is the end goal of a sprint? What should you have at the end of that? I think every step in the RAD method is like you have something that's usable that you can put in front of users that they can test and react to. But like Agile, what is the like how do you break the sprints down? What are the milestones that you would set for yourself in a specific sprint? That's something that I would be curious to ask somebody who's more familiar with Agile. RAD can adjust to changing requirements. Yep, I think that's definitely a benefit. I think there's a lot of disconnect on day one, like with what the owner or the founder, whoever has the app idea, asks for, and what that looks like in 30 days or 60 days, or just as they get more information from the users that they work with, things are going to change. Like there's no way around that. There's always new information that's coming in. There's always a competitor that's doing something similar that they may be learning from and following. That just happens, and I think the waterfall method does not allow for that type of flexibility. And then the Agile can quite easily adjust to changes even at later stages. Involves clients throughout the development cycle. This is a big difference. This is something that I think agencies and freelancers are having a hard time getting used to, because typically, I mean, when I hired a developer to build my first app, I just gave them the requirements on the first day that I met them. I didn't hear from them for like 2 months, and then I got an application back, right? There was very little involvement on my part, to my detriment, because I don't think the requirements that I gave them were that great or specific enough for them to really have built what I was asking for. So you're kind of just like, as the non-technical person, waiting for this team of developers to produce your software for you, just kind of sitting back like, well, I hope they do a good job. Like, you don't really have any kind of insight into what they're doing. It's a very black box. So I definitely like being involved more, and that's the way that I try to work with my clients. Is that probably to a fault? Is that I like to involve them in the process to make sure that I'm going in the right direction and that they're understanding what we're building. Like, I feel like we both need to know that. Only involve client. Yeah, exactly. The waterfall only involves clients during the planning stage because they're getting all of the informations for those requirements at that specific point in time. That's the thing. It doesn't allow for any type of dynamic change or collaboration. It's at that specific moment in time. And the fact that the waterfall method is time intensive, right? It's a longer development cycle. Who knows what's going to change in that time? So is this really suited for testing new ideas in the modern, development landscape? Probably not. So and I'm also noticing a lot of overlap between Agile and RAD here, so I'm kind of questioning what the difference is. RAD prioritizes functionality over aspects of UI and UX. Considers all aspects of the app before deployment under waterfall, and then the UI UX takes as much priority as the functionality. So honestly, it feels like the Agile method is the most balanced of the three. This is rapid app development is very, it's very like get it done quick, get it done fast, get it out. Waterfall is like, no, let's plan this to an extreme and not deviate from that plan. And Agile kind of takes a middle of the road approach. So yeah, I'm guessing that there may just be a time and a place for each of these. Reginald, thanks for joining, buddy. When it comes to building apps for clients, I'm not a fan of speed over quality models, mostly because the client's expectations and the development method often do not match. Most clients want a fully functioning, bug-free MVP built in just one month. But I'm happy to see what this but is going to be. Yeah, I hear you on the speed over quality. Here's my problem with the when you don't prioritize, it's not even about speed, right? I don't think it's about speed in terms of like how fast you can develop. I think it's how fast can you start getting feedback and reaction from users. You should be trying to do that, in my opinion, right? This is just the way that I've fallen into. In my opinion, you should be trying to get to that point where you're getting reaction from users with the shortest amount of development hours in between, right? Like minimizing the development hours before you're in front of users, right? This doesn't mean that it has to be fully functioning. It just means that you have to know whether or not you are prioritizing your development correctly. And you can't do that without engaging with users in some way. Hence the whole popularity of the build in public movement and why people are posting like, every little iteration online in front of people because it gets people interested. And you can really see like, all right, these people are the ones that I'm speaking to. Now that also asks, it brings up a lot of questions. I mean, I do love the whole, the buzz and the adoption of the build in public model, but I also think that that is, how do you get in front of people that aren't online, right? Like, what if the place where your audience spends their time is not in a digital online environment? How do you build in public with them? That's a lot more difficult. Um, so I don't know. I don't know how to think about that. But I definitely think it is important to start engaging those people as early as possible with the fewest amount of development hours. When I work with clients, we usually try to do between 40 and 50 development hours, something that's usable that you can put in front of people, right? Even if it's just a wireframe, or not a wireframe. Usually it's something a little bit more developed than a wireframe, but just something that they can react to and say, okay, yes, this is useful to me. No, this is not useful to me. I don't know what to click on. And even better, if you can actually see what they're doing when they're inside what you put, like how they behave once they're inside, instead of just telling you, because I think there's a lot of discrepancy from what people tell you they want and what they actually do when they're inside what you put the application that you're building. Reggie, did you have another half of that thought? Because I was really curious to see what what the next section was going to be. All right, so let's see when you can use the rapid application development methodology. When is the best use for this? If you've got a pool of users who can give you consistent and reliable feedback on the prototypes you make, them rapid app development is a great model to follow. By the way, I'll drop this in the chat for anyone that's interested. Prototypes built with a rapid application development model depend on the feedback from the previous iterations, so reliable feedback from dependable sources can be immensely helpful. When you've got the budget compared with other development models, rapid application development is relatively inexpensive. But there are some instances where the development can be expensive due to the RAD characteristics. Check that out. I think it can, I think the way that you think about whether or not this software is more expensive to develop or not is like, usually people think how much and how long before I can put this in front of users. When I get that question, like how much is this going to cost to build and how long is it going to take? That usually they're usually coming thinking about it like, how long before I can put this in front of people, right? But I think what this RAD method does is like, it really minimizes that cost, because you're saying like it's not really about like how much and how long. It's more about like how how I lost my train of thought. How can we minimize the development hours and get this in front of people? I messed that up. I messed up the way that I was thinking about that, but um budget becomes less important, I think. I think the budget becomes less important when you're doing this because you know you're building iteratively. I lost what I was trying to say there. All right, Reggie. Second part of my comment was, but they want a developer to build it as fast and as cheaply as possible. These two ideologies are incompatible. Yeah, I mean that's a tricky one. I guess you do kind of have to balance the quality of what you're building and how fast it goes out, and does it match the person's budget and what they expect to build. But I try to work in these, yeah, like 40 I would call them 40-hour development blocks, where it's like, all right, 40 hours, we have something that you can put in front of users and learn something from. um I think the reason the budget conversation then becomes less important is because it's like we're in kind of in agreement that this is never going to be done. It's not, there's no end to this. So you can't say like how much is this going to cost? It can cost how it's going to, like, if you want to keep building, it's going to there's always going to be a development cost to it. But we're not waiting. There's not like, we're not waiting before until we've ran out of our budget or runway before we're even finding out whether this is useful and people want this. I think that's what I was trying to say that I couldn't quite get out. Final part of the comment is, when it comes to developing my own projects, I can build the way I want when I want. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the ideal situation if you're just building a product for yourself and hopefully you're trying to build some like an income for yourself through your own development projects. But this, of course, is a hot topic for anyone who's building for other people, freelancers or agencies and stuff. It's like, what's the best way to build? Or what's the best way to charge for your services? And there is no right answer. I think everyone has a different way of billing. Everyone has a different way that they prefer working. And it's just there seems to be no consensus in the development community anywhere on the right way to scope a project, build it, and charge your client for. Everyone is just kind of all over the place with this. And Reggie, I'm curious if you think if there's such a thing as passive income, right? Like, we thought this passive income seems to be like the golden like thing that everybody wants to achieve, but it doesn't really exist, because even if you have, like, you say you build, a software that you're making, say, like, I don't know, $5,000 a month on, you're still maintaining that, you're still responding to user requests. There's always going to be bugs to fix. Like, how passive is that really? Is that just something that like happens in the future where it's like, oh yeah, like, this system is pretty self-sustaining, and maybe you've hired someone else to maintain it for you. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm curious. I'm believing less and less that passive income is even really a thing these days. I think that there's always some maintenance, or something, something to do that's going to be an effort. You're not just sitting back and just letting the cash roll in. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong though. I've never had it, so it could just be that I'm, haven't achieved it yet. All right, Don. One big difference that I see is that the user is way more involved in the process from the start, so they are more invested in the product. Yeah, definitely true. I can be more like a collaboration between buyer and seller. Yeah, exactly. There is this kind of give and take. Not it's like a triad almost, right? There's the, unless the developer is the also the founder. Um, but yeah, like the involvement of the users comes much earlier. And in a lot of cases, I think that the users are there even before you start building anything functional, right? There's already a user base that's just like banging down your door for this product that you're building, because you've done kind of market testing and you can see that there's a real need for what you're building. That's the ideal situation to be in. These people will pay you, or maybe you've got some pre-sales or something like that before you've even started to build anything, which is so counterintuitive, right? Like if you're coming at this the first time, you think, well, I have to build something before anybody will pay me anything, right? That's what intuition tells us, but there's situations where that's not the case. Like Neil, I know, started putting out his Neil Pierce when he was building Atomic Fusion. He started putting out all of these, just things that he was working on and seeing who was actually interested. And he had users before he even released the product to anybody, right? I think he had, some beta testers and whatnot beforehand, but he did that completely in public. So he was so confident that when he said, okay, the gates are open, sign up, there were going to be people signing up. He had no question in his mind, which is so different than the way that I've done it in the past, right? Like think like I have to build something in order to be able to, show anybody or talk about it with anybody, and that's just not the case. It's a hard mental block to get over. I urge to pursue passive income, but I find that my mind becomes bored and stagnant when it has nothing to do. Yeah, like victim of your own success, right? What are you gonna do if your income is completely passive? If you were independently wealthy, which again is like us that come from like working class backgrounds and have had to had a job their whole life to sustain their lifestyle, like that's the golden standard, is to be able to just sit back and collect money. But what would you do? What would you do with your time then? I don't know what I would do. I'd probably lose my mind. I'd probably get drunk way too much. Like I'd probably just like fall into bad habits if I had no responsibility to kind of keep me grounded. I'd probably make some bad decisions. I also don't have kids, so I don't have any responsibility to that, to kids, which might not be everybody's situation. But I think that there's just I try to think about like, all right, if I do achieve this, pie in the sky goal of passive income, and I completely don't have to work again, I have no idea what I would do with my time. I have no clue. Probably start working again. Like I'd probably just like find another job or find some other project to work on. Just don't know what I would do. All right, Reggie, in software development specifically, I almost feel like if I ever let up, I'll get rusty and quickly left behind. So I don't know if I want to be passive. Exactly. Like, how do you stay up to date on like the new, if you don't have a reason to stay up to date on like the new like software that's or platforms that are coming out, like why if you don't have that need for it, why would you kind of stay up to date? Like I wouldn't have learned Xano most recently. It's just fresh top of mind. I wouldn't have learned Xano or taken the effort to like learn Xano if I didn't have a real user need for it. So how do you keep yourself sharp if you don't have a real need to be, putting an effort into learning something? That's a good question. I need the reason. I can't just like say, I'm going to take a JavaScript course just for the sake, I want to learn JavaScript this week. I can't do that. I just won't stay with it. But if I have a real reason, like I need to learn JavaScript because all of the options that I've exhausted in Bubble, I can't do. So I need to build a plugin for myself. I'll learn JavaScript. It's not going to, it's not like the intelligence. Like I can do it. I know if I put enough effort, I'll do it. It's just that I really need that like motivation to learn something and really put that effort in. Otherwise I'll just lose interest. I can't do it just for the sake of learning. I hate learning. I like knowing things, but I hate the process of learning. If my income was completely passive, I would use my time to fully pursue all of the side passions I was forced to put on the back burner in order to become specialization in whatever made me rich. What are those side? Give me an example of a side passion. I don't have any side passions. none that I can think of. I mean, I scuba dive, but like very rarely. I don't know if I have any side passions that I could consider doing full time. Traveling is such a basic answer, like, oh, I would travel. I would travel the world. I mean, I've traveled quite a bit, and like it does like it does start to feel a lot of the same if you've gone to so many countries. Not there's still places in the world that I want to go, but I don't think that I don't think I would be content with just traveling for the rest of my life. Yeah, it seems like I'd be doing the same things anyway, even if I was traveling to different places. I don't know. But give me an example. Like, what's a side passion that you would like full time? Like, you're like, yeah, I could do that for the rest of my life and be fully content. All right, so definitely a little off topic, I guess. But yeah, this is the idea the of I definitely think that there is a time and a place for all of these methodologies, right? Like there isn't a I don't think there's a right answer here. I think I've fallen into the rad method just naturally, just because of I guess the way that the ways that haven't worked for me. Also, trying to plan out such a structured development plan for a client, and then just being completely wrong about how much to charge and how long it was going to take. So I've kind of back into this where it's a little bit safer, where I can say, all right, we're going to build in these small iterative steps and see what we learn along the way. And if the client is open to that ideology, then I think that is somebody that I can work with. And that's just, again, it's a preference. It's more of a preference on my part. Um, but like that, this wouldn't work. This wouldn't work in a situation where a client knows exactly what they want to build. They know the exact like they literally have the software like in their head about. Well, I don't even want to say that because most people think they do, and then when they see it on a screen, it actually changes quite a bit. But maybe the thing I keep coming back to is like a large scale enterprise corporate environment where they've been using a software for years. They know exactly what they wanted to do, and they want to just make some minor tweaks. Maybe that's a waterfall method. I don't know when the waterfall method is the most is the best option. I just don't. I feel like there's so few cases where that's true, uh, just because of how fast everything changes and how users needs change at the time of a drop of a hat. Martial arts. Okay, that's cool. Maybe I need more hobbies. Learning robotics and mechanical engineering and filmmaking. Okay, fair enough, man. I mean, that's like those are some pretty um involved high effort projects that I suppose you could build a lifestyle around. And very disparate too, like filmmaking and mechanical engineering. Those are some deep fields. JJ Englert was a film producer for a while. Uh, he stepped out of that to jump into the app development space, but he's got a background in that. I don't know if you've connected with him. Um, cool. I feel like I need a hobby. You have all of these. Reggie has all of these interests, and I'm like, I don't even know what like. I don't have any of those things that I can point to. I like running, but maybe run a marathon. I don't know. Don, agree. One system isn't right or wrong. It just suits some people better or worse. People and situations, I think too. Like right, like the situations in which uh you apply these methods, I think is probably the the most useful, or when it's going to make sense. But yeah, I think I think it kind of just going through this and kind of like thinking through some of the other options that are out there, it does kind of help put things in perspective. Um, and I think that I am like the RAD model definitely suits like the no code space very well. Just because it seems like everyone is testing new ideas. I know we're kind of like still baby stepping towards like enterprise level software, and everyone talks about enterprises being the kind of the end goal. Like, can we support these enterprise use cases? uh and like, I guess all that remains to be seen. But there, it's kind of just like, I hope that we can adopt the different models, and we start realizing like there is some standardization that we can do and proper planning. Because I think I just tend to jump into building right away without a real like kind of a lack of plan. I definitely come from that side of things, where it's just like, oh, I can build, so let me just start building. And that's not always the best way to approach every use case. So um you know again, it's all about what we're learning and what we're working on. uh, all right, everybody, I think those are my thoughts on the RAD model. I appreciate everyone jumping on today, and appreciate you throwing some comments into the chat. uh I hope everyone has a great holiday. I will be back next week. I believe we can support enterprise, but the no code community needs to set some standards for ourselves the way Python has. But I think it's time we need uniform. Yeah, I agree. I think that these standards are still being set, right? And there's some pioneering people like Peter Amile, who is building. I think he's redoing the Bubble manual, which is going to include some best practices for working in Bubble, because there really isn't. Like, there's no documentation, little to no documentation on best practices in Bubble. Like, there are tips and tricks to make you a more proficient Bubble developer, but there really isn't anything that says like this is the proper way to approach app development in our space, right? Like, I don't know of any resources like that. Bubble security is another what do you call it? There, Peter Amelia did put that bubble, the ultimate guide to bubble security and the ultimate guide to um, Bubble performance. And again, those are great resources, and they do allude to performance practices, but like at a more macro scale, zooming out from just performance and security. What is the best approach for what is the best way to standardize what we're building? I think that still remains to be seen. I don't think we have that yet. We're still kind of figuring out what that is. Um, and like I always point out, like the term bubble development hasn't even really been in use for more than like 2 years, right? It's very new. All these standards are still being decided on. Um, so we'll get there. We'll get there. But I think that is an important part of like breaking into the enterprise space and scalable internal tools for companies, which by the way is kind of conflicting for me, because if there are cases that prove Bubble can scale and Xano can scale with a large audience in terms of traffic and just complexity of the functionality. So why is that any different for internal tools? Like, it doesn't enterprise just mean like internal tools? Why is it any different if you can scale with, in a public facing application? Why would you not be able to scale a, an internal application that a company uses? Wouldn't there be less users in that case? That thing is always confusing to me. Now, there are certain cases where, like the tool that you're working with isn't the best for the job. An example, like why I chose to learn Xano in the first place is like, well, Bubble wasn't doing the large amounts of like importing, like CSV imports in an efficient way, and then being able to run operations on like a million plus records in a short period of time. It just wasn't efficient in the way that Bubble was doing it. So, and it was slow and it was kind of painful. Like, there was so many development hours that went into just doing these imports and running these operations. And you kind of just have to sit there while the thing is running and just like, all right, well, I can't really do anything now. So it's felt like a lot of waste of time. That is the reason that I started learning Xano and playing around in Xano, is because I had a real need for it, right? I was feeling the pain of an upper limit of Bubble, or just an area that Bubble hasn't really developed out of their platform yet, uploading and running CRUD operations on large data sets, which, again, Xano handles very well. So there is that need, but my thought was that, you know, there is a case where that's the right tool for the right job, but this is still considered a low code. I'm still using no and low code tools to perform these actions. So I don't understand why we say enterprise is not, why we've kind of made it a habit of saying that, oh yeah, Bubble doesn't do enterprise. Why not? Why not? I don't know what is the specific limitation on Bubble that says it can't be used as an internal scalable app. I'm just not sure. And I know Softer, the platform Softer, they're even focusing on enterprise. Like that's what the CEO, she said. I was in a one of her webinars, and she said that, yeah, Softer is trying to fill that gap of internal enterprise scale apps. So, like, what are they doing different? I guess is my question. Like, what are they doing differently than Bubble is? But at the end of the day, it's the right tool for the right job, right? Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the chat and the back and forth. You all give me something to think about. It does help when I have someone to bounce ideas off of. So I appreciate that. All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining. I will be back next week. Hope you have a great holiday. This is the Rad Stream Rapid App Development. We're talking about everything related to app development, software development, finding users, all the challenges that come with that. So I will catch you next week. Later.